The night of September 7th, 1996, was marked as the moment when Tupac Shakur suffered a fatal attack in Las Vegas. However, for some, his death was not a surprise. Shortly before the incident, the rapper had allegedly written letters and left messages that seemed to predict his own fate. These writings not only indicated a sense of imminent danger, but also suggested that he might have been at the center of something much bigger than just a rivalry between artists. If Tupac really knew he was going to be murdered, what did he discover that put him at risk? Were these letters merely the reflections of a man surrounded by enemies, or was there a real warning about what was to come? Welcome to another night where mysteries never sleep. I am Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before we begin, I'd like to ask for your help. Like the video, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's just one click, but it makes a huge difference in helping YouTube deliver the videos to more people and allowing me to continue bringing this content to you. I'm counting on you. Let's get to the video. Few artists in history carried such a strong sense of destiny as Tupac Shakur. He spoke about his own death with an unsettling certainty, as if he knew his time was running out. But what few people know is that, beyond his music and interviews, Tupac also left behind letters. In them, he seemed to predict exactly what would happen to him. Warnings? Outbursts? Or the final message of a man who already understood he was surrounded? Tupac always had a troubled relationship with the music industry. He was not just a rapper, but a man who grew up hearing speeches of resistance and understood the power games behind the scenes. He knew there was a structure much larger than what the public could see, and for a long time, he navigated between this reality and his career. But it was when he started speaking too much about it that his position in the industry changed. And that's when he began writing these warnings. And it's always like this: as long as you play the game, everything's fine. But try wanting to leave. The problem with Tupac is that he didn't just want to leave, he wanted to expose the entire board. One of the most well-known letters was sent to a close friend, where Tupac stated that he was marked for death. This term was not just an exaggerated expression. He had already been attacked before, had survived an ambush in 1994, and knew that in the world he lived in, one mistake could be fatal. But was the danger only coming from the streets? Or did he have information that put him at risk for another reason? His relationship with Death Row Records is also part of this puzzle. Tupac signed with the label while he was in prison, and upon his release, he realized that it was not just a music contract, but a much deeper and harder to break connection. In the months leading up to his death, he began showing signs that he wanted to leave the label. And anyone familiar with the backstage of hip-hop knows that leaving an empire like that was never a simple task. Could his decision have been the spark for something bigger? The most intriguing fact is that not all of Tupac's letters have been disclosed. Some have been made public, but others have simply disappeared. There are reports that some were sold to private collectors, while others ended up in hands that never wanted their content to be revealed. But why? What was in them that the public could not read? That feeling of being watched was not just random paranoia. FBI documents prove that Tupac had been under surveillance for years. His political connections, his lyrics, and even his friendships put him in the crosshairs of powerful institutions. And when it comes to artists who try to challenge entire systems, history has many examples of how that can end. But was he really a threat at that level? The fact is that Tupac didn't just write about his death. He rapped about it. In songs like Ain't Hard to Find, he said, "I've been marked for death, I can't trust anyone." To many, they were just lyrics. But for those who know his history, those verses take on a completely different weight. Did he truly feel he was being hunted? Or did he already know exactly how he would be eliminated? On the night of the attack, Tupac was in a car with Suge Knight on a busy avenue in Las Vegas. There were dozens of witnesses, but no one could clearly identify the shooters. How was a crime of this level never solved? And more importantly, did he already know that trip would be his last? What makes this case even stranger is that, to this day, some people close to him avoid talking about these letters. If they were just insignificant writings, why the silence? Was there something in those words that could completely change the official version of the events? The big question is, were these letters merely reflections of a man who felt his time was running out, or were they evidence that he already knew exactly what was going to happen? And if it's the latter, why has no one ever done anything with that information? To understand Tupac's letters and what may have led to his fate, we need to look beyond the words on the pages. The rapper didn't just talk about his death. He warned about a system that, according to him, kept artists trapped and discarded them when they were no longer useful. For years, he navigated this environment, but in the last months of his life, something changed. He began to expose what he saw. And when someone becomes a problem for the machine, that machine finds a way to eliminate them. The music industry has always been surrounded by stories of exploitative contracts, manipulation, and even connections to crime. But Tupac was not an ordinary artist. He came from a family involved in revolutionary movements, grew up hearing about resistance, and understood the power games behind the scenes. He knew that the biggest names in music were not just competing for fame, they were dealing with forces much greater. And unlike many, he was not afraid to talk about it. In several interviews, Tupac mentioned that artists did not have real control over their careers. He said that the moment a musician tried to break free, they would face consequences. But he went beyond words. In the final months of his life, reports emerged that he wanted to completely break away from his record label, Death Row Records, and create something of his own. For an artist of his stature, this was a bold move. But did this decision put a target on his back? Death Row Records, led by Suge Knight, was much more than just a record label. Behind the scenes, there were rumors of involvement in illicit activities, internal disputes, and an influence that extended far beyond music. For many, being part of Death Row was like joining a brotherhood, and leaving was not easy. When Tupac began distancing himself and talking about independence, some believe he signed his own death warrant. Just weeks before his death, Tupac gave clear signs that something was happening. He spoke in a farewell tone in some conversations, mentioned that he felt he was running out of time, and most importantly, began keeping secrets about his next moves. This did not go unnoticed. He was one of the most closely watched artists of the time, and any move he made attracted attention. But did he know he was being watched? Another intriguing point is that Tupac's relationship with powerful figures in the music industry began to change. Managers, producers, and executives who had once been by his side started acting differently. He felt isolated, as if he were fighting alone against something beyond his control. And in his letters, he made it clear that this feeling of betrayal came from within. But who exactly was betraying Tupac? His final days were filled with tension. Some witnesses say he seemed more restless, as if he knew something was about to happen. He avoided discussing his future plans, and unlike before, he always seemed to be on high alert. This change in behavior reinforces the theory that he had already been warned. But if he was warned, why did he continue down the same path? The answer may lie in what he knew and was ready to reveal. Tupac had a powerful voice, a massive reach, and an audience that followed him faithfully. If he had information about the industry, contracts, or connections that were meant to remain secret, his mere existence became a threat. And when someone becomes too big of a threat, steps can be taken to silence them. Today, some people close to Tupac speak about what he faced behind the scenes, but always with caution. There is a silent fear of touching this subject, as if there are still consequences for digging into this story. This reinforces the idea that what happened to him was not an isolated case, but part of something much bigger. But how much did Tupac really know? Were his letters attempts to warn those around him, or was he still trying to figure out who was against him? To understand Tupac's final days, it is impossible to ignore his relationship with Death Row Records. The label was responsible for reviving his career at a critical moment, but at the same time, it became a prison he was trying to escape from. What started as a promising deal soon turned into something much more complex, involving internal disputes, power plays, and secrets he might never have been meant to uncover. Death Row wasn't just a record label, it was practically an organization. You didn't just sign a contract, you made a pact. Tupac joined Death Row in 1995 after signing a contract while still in prison. Suge Knight, the label's founder, paid a multi-million-dollar bail to get him out of jail, and in return, the rapper agreed to release 3 albums under the label's name. On the surface, it seemed like a lucrative partnership, but it quickly became clear that the deal came at a high cost. Death Row wasn't just a record label. It was an organization shrouded in mystery and rumors of activities that extended far beyond music. In the first months, Tupac seemed completely immersed in Death Row's lifestyle. He recorded songs quickly, made appearances alongside Suge Knight, and embodied the aggressive image the label projected. But behind the scenes, he began to realize that his situation was not as beneficial as it seemed. Financial information was obscure, contracts were not transparent, and control over his career was slipping from his hands. What had once seemed like an alliance was turning into a trap. Over time, Tupac began expressing his dissatisfaction. He wanted to create his own label, Machiavelli Records, a project that would give him total artistic and financial independence. However, this plan meant leaving death row, something few had managed to do without consequences. For an artist of his stature, leaving would not just be a financial blow to the label, but also a risk to those who had an interest in what he knew. Reports indicate that shortly before his death, Tupac was already avoiding meetings with certain death row members and talked about how he needed to get rid of the label. Close witnesses say he believed he was being watched and that his trust in Suge Knight and other executives was fading. But how far did this conflict go? Did he truly believe he was in danger, or did he simply want to take a different path? The night of his death raises even more suspicions. Tupac was in Las Vegas to watch a boxing match, accompanied by members of death row, including Suge Knight. After the event, he got into a fight with an alleged member of a rival gang, an incident that, for many, was the spark that led to what happened later. Hours later, his car was ambushed in an attack that remains unsolved to this day. But there's something odd about this sequence of events. If Tupac was surrounded by security that night, how did the shooters get so close so easily? How was a crime committed on a busy street, filled with witnesses, never solved? Was that attack really an isolated act, or had something been planned long before? What is known is that after Tupac's death, death row collapsed. Suge Knight was imprisoned shortly after. The label lost its dominance in hip-hop, and many people close to Tupac avoided discussing what really happened behind the scenes. To many, this only reinforces the theory that something bigger was happening behind his murder. If Tupac was really trying to leave death row, did he end up crossing the wrong people? Did his letters reveal something that put his life in danger? And if that was the case, why has no one ever been able to prove it? The night of September 7, 1996, was supposed to be just another glamorous event in the hip-hop world. Tupac was in Las Vegas to watch the Mike Tyson vs. Bruce Seldon fight, accompanied by Suge Knight and members of Death Row Records. The rapper seemed to be in a good mood, enjoying the night as any other star would. But something changed over the course of the evening, something that turned that night into his final chapter. Shortly after the fight, in the lobby of the MGM Grand, Tupac and his group got into a fight. Security cameras captured the exact moment he and other Death Row members assaulted Orlando Anderson, an alleged member of the Southside Crips gang. The reason? An old feud that supposedly began when Anderson robbed one of the label's associates. The incident seemed to end there, but did it really? Or was that the moment that started it all? After the altercation, Tupac returned to his hotel and later left again to go to a nightclub. On the way, he got into Suge Knight's car, a black BMW, and headed down the Las Vegas Strip. Around 11 p.m., while stopped at a traffic light, a white Cadillac pulled up on the passenger side. Before anyone could react, a barrage of gunfire was unleashed on Tupac. The rapper was hit 4 times. Suge Knight, who was driving, escaped with barely a scratch. As Tupac agonized in the passenger seat, the car sped off. The scene looked like something out of a movie. Flashing lights, people panicking, and one of hip-hop's biggest stars fighting for his life in the middle of a busy avenue. But the strangest thing of all, no one was ever officially held responsible for the crime. The investigation was confusing from the start. Witnesses gave conflicting statements, some refused to talk, and others disappeared over time. Despite the large number of people present, no one could clearly identify the shooters. The white Cadillac simply vanished into the Las Vegas night, as if it had never existed. And the most astonishing part, Tupac didn't die immediately. He was taken to the hospital, where he remained for 6 days before passing away on September 13th. During that time, he was conscious at certain moments. Could he have said something about who attacked him? Now, here's the most intriguing detail. Tupac had already spoken about a possible attack against him. His letters mentioned that he was being watched, that people around him were not trustworthy, and that if something happened, it would not be a coincidence. He knew he was marked, but he didn't know exactly when or how. Was that night simply the inevitable conclusion of something that had been planned for months? Another question that has never been answered is the absence of security at the time of the attack. Tupac was usually surrounded by bodyguards, but that night, strangely, none were with him inside the car. Why? Was it just a coincidence, or did someone ensure that he was vulnerable at that exact moment? After Tupac's death, several theories began to surface. Some claimed the attack was a direct act of revenge for the MGM Grand incident, while others suggested that he was the victim of something much bigger. The fact is that many pieces of this puzzle never fully fit together, and his letters may hold the key to understanding what really happened. If Tupac truly left messages predicting his death, did they contain clues that could have prevented the attack? Or did someone make sure that no one would ever uncover those answers? Since his death, theories that Tupac was silenced have only grown stronger. Many believe he was not just a victim of gang rivalry or a revenge killing, but rather someone who knew too much, and for that reason he had to be eliminated. But what exactly could he have discovered that made his death inevitable? Tupac was never just a rapper. He was an activist, a poet, and a man who understood the mechanics of power. He grew up surrounded by revolutionary ideals, as his mother, Afeni Shakur, was a member of the Black Panther Party. This background shaped his worldview, allowing him to see how systems worked to control those who tried to step out of line. In hip-hop, he realized things were no different. In interviews, Tupac spoke about how artists were manipulated, trapped in exploitative contracts, and used as pawns in a much larger game. He claimed that the music industry had connections to powerful groups, and that once an artist tried to break free from this system, their career, or their life could be destroyed. Was he about to reveal something too big? Shortly before his death, Tupac expressed a growing desire for independence. He didn't just want to leave Death Row Records. He wanted to create his own label, a space where he would have full control over his music and could help other artists do the same. To many, this might seem like just a business decision, but for those familiar with the industry's inner workings, this move meant that he would no longer be a valuable asset, but a threat. There are reports that Tupac possessed documents and information that could have compromised important figures in the music industry and even beyond. Some sources claim that he had evidence of suspicious financial dealings within the industry, as well as connections that were never meant to be exposed. If this is true, he may have been seen as a problem that needed to be dealt with before he spoke too much. Another intriguing detail is that Tupac seemed aware of this danger. His music, his interviews, and even his letters indicated that he felt something was coming. He spoke about betrayals, about being watched, and about not knowing whom to trust. When someone has that level of paranoia, there is usually a real reason behind it. After his death, efforts to discredit his legacy were swift. Rumors surfaced to tarnish his image, theories were spread to confuse the public, and his murder was never solved. This sequence of events raises an important question. If his death was just an isolated act of violence, why did so much information about him disappear or become distorted? The mystery deepens when we examine what happened to other hip-hop figures who also tried to challenge the system. Over the years, several artists who spoke out about industry control, shady contracts, or internal schemes met tragic ends, had their careers destroyed, or had their lives cut short under suspicious circumstances. Was Tupac just another name on that list? If he truly had dangerous information, do those proofs still exist somewhere? Did someone keep what he knew? And more importantly, will these truths ever come to light? If Tupac really left letters warning about his death, why did no one do anything? This is one of the most intriguing aspects of this mystery. Since fragments of these documents began to surface, many have wondered whether authorities simply ignored these warnings, or if there was a deliberate effort to cover everything up. If these letters were just the ramblings of a paranoid artist, why did some disappear? Why did others end up in the hands of people who never wanted to disclose them? The few letters that have come to light show that Tupac felt he was being watched. He spoke about betrayals around him, about people who seemed to be waiting for the right moment to act. The tone of these messages was not that of someone who was merely afraid. It was that of someone who knew he was in real danger. If these words had been taken seriously, could his fate have been different? The strangest part is that not all the letters were revealed. There are reports that some were handed over to people close to him and later vanished. Others were allegedly purchased by anonymous collectors. But what was in them that justified their disappearance? Could they have contained information that would change everything we know about his murder? Another detail that stands out is the lack of interest from authorities in thoroughly investigating the case. Despite Tupac being one of the biggest stars of the time and his murder happening on a busy street, the investigations were inconsistent from the start. Witnesses were not properly questioned, evidence was lost, and no one was ever held accountable for the crime. This raises an important question. Was this just a case of negligence, or was there something that couldn't be revealed? In the years following his death, several people who tried to investigate the case independently reported difficulties. Some sources were silenced, documents went missing, and information that could have helped solve the crime was discarded. If these letters really contained clues about who was behind it all, who would have an interest in ensuring they never came to light? Curiously, some of the letters that did reach the public were discredited by experts, who claimed they could be fake or fabricated to fuel conspiracy theories. But was this an honest analysis, or an attempt to divert attention from what was actually in them? Time has shown that whenever something new about Tupac emerges, there is resistance to accepting this information as legitimate. The truth is that when a case remains unsolved for so long, it's hard not to suspect a cover-up. If there was an effort to hide these letters, who was behind it? The record label? Authorities? Or someone even more influential? Tupac always believed that his voice had power, and perhaps that's why he decided to leave these messages. But what he wrote in them may never be fully known. If there are hidden letters somewhere, will the world ever gain access to what Tupac tried to say? Tupac Shakur's letters remain one of the most enigmatic aspects of his story. If he truly knew his death was approaching, did he try to warn the world? Or were his words silenced before they could change anything? What is clear is that his death was not just the end of a brilliant career, but the beginning of a mystery that remains unanswered to this day. Many questions remain unsolved. Who really wanted Tupac dead? Were his letters ignored or deliberately concealed? And above all, is there still some lost information waiting to be discovered? Maybe one day, these pieces will finally come together, and the truth about Tupac Shakur will come to light. This story is just one piece, and one day, you may see the entire puzzle. If this made you think, subscribe, like the video. It helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share, because after all, more voices mean more discoveries.